April dawn leaks through the smoke hole, and the grain chest is almost empty. A woman scrapes the bottom with her fingers, not handfuls, sweepings, dust, husks, a few hard kernels hiding in the seams. Last night's pottage goes back over the fire with more water, because breakfast must look like food even when it is mostly steam. Outside, the fields are turning green. Birds are back. The worst cold has passed. That is what makes it cruel. The next harvest is still months away. The cow is thin. The hens lay little. The seed grain sits in a sack that must not be opened, because eating it today means planting nothing tomorrow. So every meal becomes a bargain with time. And this is the question. If medieval peasants survived winter, why could spring become the deadliest season? To understand why the danger arrived with spring, we first have to forget the cartoon version of the medieval peasant diet. So this is not a story about royal banquets. No swans with gilded beaks. No towers of sugar. No lord carving venison under candlelight while everyone else disappears into the background. We are looking at the other table, the wooden bowl, the iron pot, the loaf cut carefully so it lasts until Saturday. Medieval peasants did eat bread and pottage, yes, but pottage was not just dirty water with oats floating in it. It could hold beans, peas, onions, leeks, cabbage, herbs, scraps of bacon, curds, or whatever the household had a right to gather, grow, catch, or trade. Archaeology backs this up. Cooking pots carried traces of dairy fats, vegetables, grains, and sometimes meat. Written records mention cheese, eggs, ale, fish, garden crops, and legumes. The real story is not that peasants ate nothing. The real story is that everything depended on season, place, rites, weather, and luck. Because the food that kept people alive in ordinary times was also the food that quietly set the trap for the hungry gap. At the center of the peasant kitchen was the pot, not a side dish, not a recipe in the modern sense, a working tool for survival. Pottage was the meal that could absorb almost anything. Water went in first, then whatever the household had: oats, barley, peas, beans, cabbage, leeks, onions, turnips, herbs from the garden, a splash of milk, a rind of cheese, a bone, a little bacon fat if the family was lucky. The point was not elegance. The point was conversion. A hard bean became edible. A tough leek softened. A small handful of grain thickened the whole pot. Yesterday's broth carried flavor into today's meal. Even a scrap that could not feed one person on its own could change the taste of food for five. This mattered because rural households lived with uncertainty built into every week. One field might do well while another failed. A cow might give milk, then dry up. The garden might offer greens in summer, roots in autumn, and almost nothing by late winter. Pottage matched that uncertainty. It could be thin when supplies were low, thick when harvest had been kind. It could feed an old man with bad teeth, a child just weaned, a laborer coming back from the fields, and a mother who had been standing over the same fire since morning. Archaeology gives us a glimpse inside those vanished meals. Residue studies from medieval cooking pots, including work connected to places like West Cotton in England, have found traces consistent with stews made from vegetables, grains, dairy, and sometimes mutton or beef. So when we picture pottage, we should not imagine one miserable bowl repeated for centuries. We should imagine a system, a fire kept low, a pot blackened by smoke, a household measuring hunger against what could still be made useful. But pottage depended on what could be gathered, grown, or stored. And the most important stored food was not in the pot, but beside it. Beside the pot was the loaf. For many working peasants, bread was not a side. It was the weight of the day in the hand. Rye bread, barley bread, maslin bread, made from mixed wheat and rye, oat cakes in some regions, dark, coarse, filling, and absolutely central. A laboring body needed calories before it needed variety. Grain supplied those calories. It could be baked into bread, boiled into gruel, stirred into pottage, or brewed into ale. A good harvest did more than fill stomachs. It gave a family bread for the table, ale for drinking, seed for the next sowing, fodder for animals, and enough surplus to meet rents and dues. That is why one failed harvest could become many failures at once. If the grain stores ran low, a household faced choices that were all dangerous. Eat the seed now, and next year's field begins empty. Keep the seed, and children go hungry. Feed the animals, and the family eats less. Slaughter the animals, and milk, manure, wool, or muscle power may disappear with them. Hunger was accounting. Beans and peas peas mattered because they changed the calculation. They stored better than many fresh foods, thickened the pot, and added protein when meat was rare, costly, or saved for special days. A handful of dried peas could turn hot water and scraps into something that stayed with you through work. Then there was ale, not always strong ale, often small ale, weak ale, everyday ale. In many medieval settings, brewing grain into a low-alcohol drink made a safer, calorie-bearing beverage than questionable water, though quality varied by place, season, and household skill. Ale was not just pleasure, it was liquid bread. So when we ask what happened when food ran out, we should not picture one empty shelf. We should picture a whole year losing its structure. Bread thins, pottage weakens, ale disappears, seed is threatened, animals become a burden. And even when there was food in the village, not every day was a day when every food could legally, spiritually, or socially be eaten. The church did not just mark Sundays and saints, it marked the stomach. Across medieval Europe, the year was broken by fast days, vigils, ember days, Fridays, and the long stretch of Lent before Easter. The exact rules varied by region and period, but the pattern was familiar. Meat was restricted. In many places, so were eggs, milk, butter, and cheese, especially in stricter seasons. That changed the pot. On an ordinary winter day, if a household had a little bacon, lard, dripping, or cheese, it could make thin food feel richer. A strip of salted pork could flavor cabbage. A spoon of fat could carry warmth through a bowl of peas. Milk could soften stale bread. On a fast day, those comforts might be forbidden. The reason was not nutrition, it was discipline. Fasting trained the body to obey the soul. It turned the calendar into a spiritual map, where ordinary hunger became part of repentance, preparation, and obedience to God. For the wealthy, restriction could become substitution. No meat? Then serve fish, salt cod, herring, eel, pike from a pond. Add almond milk where dairy was forbidden. Use spices, sauces, and skilled cooks to make abstinence look almost like luxury. For poor families, the same rule landed differently. Fish was not always cheap. Fresh fish depended on rivers, ponds, coasts, rights, and markets. Salt fish could be costly. Almonds were beyond reach. Peasant household might replace meat not with a clever dish, but with more bread, more onions, more beans, thinner pottage, and weaker ale. And Lent came at a cruel time. Late winter and early spring were when stored grain ran low, animals had not yet fattened, gardens had not yet returned, and the first green shoots were still promises rather than meals. The church calendar did not create scarcity by itself, but it could shape it, tighten it, redirect it. So hunger was not only a failed harvest, it was a season, a rule, a prayer, a choice made over a smoky pot while the fields outside were still bare. So families prepared for scarcity as best they could. Long before the hungry gap arrived, survival began in the smoke, salt, cellar, and grain chest. Summer was not only eaten, it was put away. After harvest, grain had to be dried hard enough to keep. Damp grain could heat, sour, sprout, or rot. A good store meant sacks, bins, chests, lofts, and careful thatching overhead. It meant keeping the floor dry and the rats out. One leak in a roof could turn future bread into a useless, stinking mass. Beans and peas were easier in one way. They could be dried until they rattled. Then, months later, they could be boiled back into life as pottage. Not fresh, not tender, but filling. Fish could be saved too if a household had access to it. Herring might be salted. Cod could be dried hard as wood. Eels could be smoked. These were not delicacies for most people. They were insurance. Protein that could cross distance and time. Meat was harder. A pig slaughtered in autumn gave more than one feast. Its sides could be rubbed with salt, hung in smoke, packed away, or turned into bacon. But salt cost money. Smoke needed fuel. Barrels, hooks, crocks, and storage space mattered. Preservation was never magic. It was work plus materials. Milk had its own race against spoilage. Fresh milk vanished quickly, so households turned it into butter or cheese when they could. Some cheeses were eaten young, the soft green cheeses of recent milk. Others were pressed, salted, and kept longer. Each step moved food a little farther from decay. That was the whole strategy. Take abundance while it existed and make it wait. But winter did not eat alone. Rent took grain. Seed had to be held back for planting. Animals needed fodder. Lent changed what could be eaten. Children grew hungry before adults admitted the stores were low. So the peasant household fought time with smoke, salt, dryness, sourness, and darkness. And time still often won. A wet autumn, a bad roof, a rat hole, a costly sack of salt, one undersized harvest, and the careful plan collapsed before the new crops were ready. And when all those defenses failed, the medieval diet crossed a line from ordinary hardship into the strange, desperate category of famine foods. Famine did not begin with people eating nothing. nothing. It began with people eating things they would have ignored in a normal year. When bread grain ran short, the loaf changed first. Rye, barley, or oats might be stretched with bran, chaff, ground peas, beans, acorn meal, even crushed weeds. The bread became darker, heavier, harder on the stomach. It filled the mouth and belly, but it did not always feed the body well. Pottage changed too. The thick stew that once held peas, beans, onions, leeks, and bits of fat became thinner, more water, fewer pulses, fewer scraps. Then came whatever could be gathered outside the ordinary food system: nettles, sorrel, dock leaves, wild garlic, roots dug from wet ground, leaves stripped from hedges. Some of these were useful. Nettles could be boiled. Acorns could be eaten after soaking and grinding if you had the time and fuel to leach out bitterness. Wild greens could add vitamins in a season when salted meat and old grain had worn people down. But famine foods were not simply hidden treasures. Many took more labor than they returned. Bark and roots might swell the stomach while giving little strength. Spoiled grain could bring sickness. Grain infected with molds could cause cramps, hallucinations, or worse. Chaff scratched through the gut. Bran added bulk, but not the kind of rich energy a working body needed. And then there was the most dangerous food in the house: seed grain. Every farming family understood what it meant. That grain was not really food. It was next year's field, stored in a sack. Eating it could keep children alive for a few more days. It could also leave nothing to sow when the soil warmed. That was the cruel arithmetic of scarcity. The definition of edible expanded because time was closing in. Fields, woods, hedges, bins, and barns all became possible sources of survival. But each choice carried a cost: sickness, weakness, shame, or the theft of a future harvest. This is where the open question sharpens. If winter was harsh, why did the breaking point so often wait until spring? Because the real enemy was not winter. It was the space between foods. By late winter, the household bins had been opened again and again. The salted meat was smaller. The cheese was harder. The peas and beans were measured by the handful. Even the ale could grow weaker, because brewing needed grain too. Then spring arrived, and it looked like rescue. Grass returned, buds opened, hedges greened. But green was not the same as food. A handful of leaves could flavor a pot, but it could not replace bread. The main grain harvest was still months away. Even early crops were uncertain, and a cold rain at the wrong moment could ruin what hope remained. Worse, spring demanded work before it gave rewards. Fields had to be dug, weeded, sown, fenced, and watched. Animals were thin after winter. Cows might not yet give enough milk. Human bodies, already weakened, had to spend strength they did not have. So the answer to the riddle of spring is not that peasants failed to prepare. It is that preparation had to outlast the calendar itself. That is what the empty bowl reveals. Not one dramatic moment, but a chain. A normal meal was pottage kept warm by the fire, bread cut thinner than yesterday, beans, peas, onions, cabbage, ale, milk if the animal had any to give. Meat and fish appeared when custom, season, money, or luck allowed it. Fasting rules shaped the table. Salting, drying, smoking, and storing tried to hold summer in place. But when that system failed, food changed names. Bran became bread. Weeds became greens. Acorns, bark, roots, and bitter leaves entered the pot. Survival meant stretching everything: the grain chest, the loaf, the fire, the body, and hope. So spring could be deadlier than winter because it came after the stores were gone, but before the fields could answer. For medieval peasants, hunger was a negotiation with time. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe for more history told through ordinary lives. And tell me in the comments, which would be hardest to rely on for a month: thin pottage, coarse bread, beans, small ale, or wild greens. Thank you for watching.